Good evening, good afternoon, everyone, based on your time, John. Welcome in Salesforce Epics Hour. And my name is Amit Chaudhary. I'm the founder of the Epics Hour. And today's topic is when Salesforce met Agile. And we have a special guest today, Sudha Sundaram. So let me hand over her for her introduction and for the session.
Thank you so much, Amit. It feels very special back to be at Apex Hours. We started this year with the CPQ series with Apex Hours, and it has been a great experience working with you. I'm so glad I'm back here again. And thanks for all that Apex Hours does to the community. We all are immensely benefiting from all that you do. And good morning, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining the session today. I know people from India and a lot of other countries are facing more tough times, and I'm going to take your time much more valuable today because you're spending your weekend. If you're in India, you're in the evening, and it's early hours in the US. Thank you for joining us, and I'm hopeful that you will take good learning from the session today. So let's get started. So today's session is going to be when Salesforce met Agile. So a little about me here. I'm Sudha Sundaram, and I have 12 plus years of experience predominantly in the Salesforce and the Agile world. In my last position, I was Vice President of Program Management Lead at Citi, managing the Salesforce programs and the Agile coaching as well. So I've coached several organizations in their Agile journey, and I'm also a certified Scrum professional, Scrum Master, and a PMI ACP certified professional. In the Salesforce side, I have 11 Salesforce.com certifications, including Application Architect. I'm also a co-founder of Salesforce Couple, a website where we host good content and a lot of blogs around business scenarios, where you could go ahead and go and check out the business scenarios there. And you can try to see if you're able to match it with the app Salesforce.com out of the box features, and you can test your knowledge. And I'm also going to be adding a lot of content around Agile, Scrum, and more specifically how it works in the Salesforce world. So feel free to go ahead and subscribe to our website. I have posted the link here. And here are my LinkedIn and the Twitter handles. If you would like to follow me, please feel free to. So before we get started, some quick ground rules. Like Amit mentioned, go ahead and post your questions in the chat window, or I will take them at the end of the session. So you could even unmute and ask me your questions. And this is going to be a pretty interactive session. So I would like to hear all your inputs as well, not just me talking. So I would like to learn as well from this session. So I'm really eager to know what you feel as we move forward. So whenever I ask a question or we want to make it interactive, please feel free to add your thoughts in the chat window, and I'm going to quickly look at that and move forward with it. And go ahead and feel free to post it in the social media, like your Twitter or LinkedIn. Share your learnings with us. You could take a tag Apex Hours and me and Amit Chaudhary as well. And you could just share learnings. You can write a few lines about what you're learning from the session, something that you're taking back home with you. And I know a lot of people like sharing slides. While you could do that, I would rather recommend and appreciate if you could add few personal lines about the learnings that you take away from the session today. So without much ado, let's get started. In today's session, we are going to cover a few topics. We are going to look at Waterfall versus Agile. So when do we use Waterfall versus when do we use Agile? And we're going to focus primarily on Scrum as a framework. So there are multiple Agile frameworks, but our focus for today and tomorrow's session is going to be predominantly Scrum. So we're going to look at what Scrum is all about and what are the Scrum roles, what are the Scrum ceremonies or events that we follow. And finally, we will end up with a very interesting story, which is when Salesforce met Agile. So moving on, so this is going to be our first interaction piece. So I would like to know, when I say Agile, the word Agile, what does it mean to you? Can you go ahead and put it in the chat window? So what does Agile mean to you? Please go ahead and put anything that you feel what Agile means to you. Again, there are no right and wrong answers. So throughout the session, whatever you tell me, it's your perspective and I completely welcome it. There is absolutely no wrong answer here. So just tell me what you feel, the word Agile means to you. I hear soft, I hear swift, quickly, smaller development. I see flexibility mentioned by a couple of you. When you're not very sure what to expect, progress, capable of accommodating change, dynamic and accept changes. These are all awesome points. Repeated builds, getting closer to goal each time. Iterative delivery, short phases of executions. Wow, nimbleness, adaptive short phases of work, deliver the development and make changes requested during development, quick feedbacks. Oh, that's pretty awesome. So you made my work much easier. I'm going to sum up and tell you what Agile means and what I feel Agile means in my journey so far. So Agile, we see a lot of organizations saying, hey, I want to move the Agile way, right? So is Agile typically a methodology? In my coaching experience, I've always thought it's not mere methodology, right? It's a mindset. It's a mind shift from how we have been doing things, a mind shift or a mindset change to a different path, right? So it's basically a culture that we implement across the company. So it's a complete mind shift from the traditional way we had been delivering products all along. So when I say mindset, I'm trying to call out a few things here. So it's a mindset wherein we welcome different perspective and diversity of thoughts and ideas. So usually whenever you're dealing with Agile teams, so what's happening is we're dealing with cross-functional teams. You keep hearing the term cross-functional, right? So what does it mean? So it means your team has a different skill set. The people with different skill set forms your team. Some people could be very strong in development, like they are great coding people. They are great in integration pieces. Some people are great in configuration. There are some people could be great in testing pieces, right? Like validating what we have built. Some people could be great architects and they are absolutely brilliant in design and so on, right? So we have all these different skill sets being involved in a single team. So what drives the success here is the mindset that we're going to welcome different perspectives. So someone who has very good knowledge on integration is going to have a different perspective over someone who doesn't, right? So the thoughts and ideas, we need to welcome them. So together we are going to benefit as a team and we're going to become stronger and more successful. So that's one of the very important mind shift changes from the traditional way where we are doing things. So we don't generally, give order to the team and the team are not the order takers, whereas we are going to welcome different perspectives and diversity of thoughts. So the next mind shift is going to be what we call like learning from your past mistakes and trying to improve, right? So we all make mistakes. There is no happy path all the time. Sometimes there are successes, sometimes there are failures. So we always have hit that failure block sometime or the other, right? So we don't just stop there. What we try to do is we learn from our past mistakes. So we take all these failures as the opportunity and we're trying to improve. So this is another mind shift change that we have to do from the traditional way we had been doing, right? The next one is we have to learn to accept changes and adapt quickly. Like many of you rightly said, Agile is all about adapting to change. You have to accept change. So change has been one thing which none of us are very happy dealing with, right? It's not a happy path for us. We like to go in a plan structure. We are always happy if we are going in a known path. When there is a change, it's not very easy to adapt. But in Agile, it's all about how do you accept these changes and adapt quickly. I mean, this is such an apt situation to talk this today, right? And over the last year, how much has changed? A pandemic hit us and a lot of things changed, right? So we have literally changed from the way we had been working with organizations. A lot of the people who have been very used to working in one room across the table are now having to work through remote teams and distributed teams and still being able to manage the businesses. So we have been going through a lot of these changes, and what has kept all of us successful over the last year, dealing with different organizations, is that we quickly adapted to this change and we started accepting it and adapting to it and finding ways to innovate so that the business runs as usual and there are not too much of setbacks. So that's one of the very important mind shift that we need to make when we decide that, hey, I'm going to go Agile or I want to be Agile, right? So that's one of the important mind shift changes. So the next one is that our teams are transparent. This is very, very important, one of the very important Agile principles and values, right? So our team should be transparent. So whether it is success or failure or whatever, or an impediment, or you just share very freely, you trust in your team. So if we are all working together as one team, I trust you all trust me. So we are willing to share what we feel, what we think, our different ideas, whatever, right? So when we hit a roadblock, we try to figure it out together. So we don't kind of remain hush hush saying, hey, I made a mistake, so I'm not going to talk about it. I'm not going to be transparent about it. I directly went and made a change in the production. Oh my God, I'm not supposed to say it out. It's not that. We all make mistakes, but what we do is we are trying to be transparent about it. So we are able to mitigate it together and kind of make the program successful, right? So this is one of the very key values of Agile. And the next critical one is our teams are able to continuously communicate and collaborate and share knowledge freely. So in Agile is more like a fast path, right? So we are constantly building something, we're constantly delivering something, we're not sitting over items for a very long time. So it's very, very important that we continuously communicate with each other, we collaborate with each other, use each other's strength, and try to become successful as a team. And then end of the day, you make your customers very happy. And while I talk about happiness, that's the next thing I'm going to emphasize more on. This is very, very important, whether you're taking the Agile path or not. Ensure that the teams are happy, because every day when we get up and decide to go to work, we need to look forward to going to work. I should be look forward to going and working as a team. If one day I wake up and saying, hey, I don't want to go to work today, I don't enjoy my work, it's totally a pain working with the team, they don't really value my ideas, it's gone, right? So I'm very less motivated to go to work. So I'm going to be very less productive. I'm not going to be transparent. It's all going to get messed up end of the day. So it's very, very important that happiness becomes one of the main factors in our team. So we all as a team are happy and you're willing to collaborate and communicate. I cannot emphasize how much important this is for the entire success of the program, product, and the teams. So ensure you have fun at work and also outside work, because end of the day, we all like to, catch up after work. We all like to be a fun crowd. We all become friends. And then we're able to keep that as a very compassionate and a loving group of people working together, right? So what happens with the end of all this is, you're going to make your customers successful, because we are doing every mindset change that is needed to make the customer successful. And end of the day, who doesn't like success, right? The customers are going to be happy, right? So end of the day, we're going to have happy customers. And one important thing is that the work pace is sustainable. So, no one should get like overworked or, underworked, right? So we like to keep the pace sustainable. So for instance, if your work pace becomes too fast, so it's going to be like your end of the day, there'll be a sprint. You would have thought you're going to deliver 20 stories based on whatever history of velocity and details you have. But then what's happening is you've done it very fast, and then you still have time to pick up more work, right? So you have, drained your energy and worked too hard and too fast, and then there's still time to pick some more stories. If your work pace is too slow, then what happens is there's going to be always some unfinished work, right? So we need to ensure the work pace is sustainable. That's something we can do across sprints and across releases, and it goes happy for everybody. So with these mindset changes, what happens is we are able to deliver high business value to the customer incrementally, sooner and faster, with higher quality and a safer delivery. So when I say safer delivery, what I mean here is it's a smooth delivery without bigger shocks in production. So there is no big shocks in production for the development team. So we are not like, oh my God, there's so much shocks in the production. We are having a lot of bugs. We need to fix them all. Or the customer doesn't get a big shock in production, like, hey, I really didn't want this feature to look like this. It looks totally different. So it's not that, right? So we want a safer delivery for the customer and for us. And we are able to innovate as we progress. So it's most of the successful programs involves innovation, right? So we are able to innovate as we progress and deliver satisfactory products, incorporating consistent feedbacks. So based on our learnings and feedbacks, we keep on improving our product to be better and better. It is very important that through this process, the teams are happy, and eventually, like I mentioned, your customers are going to be very happy, right? So moving on, there is no one size fits all, right? So what might fit my need might not fit yours, and vice versa, right? So the traditional waterfall methodology can still be a fit for some programs depending on their parameters. So one thing I've consistently noted in my coaching experience is that some customers have come to me and told me like, hey, I want to go the agile way because my competitors are going agile. They're trying to be agile, and I want to take that path as well because I don't lose in my market share. Or they might come back and tell me, hey, that's the buzzword. The agile is a buzzword. Why not we go and adopt agile? So I always try to take a step back and try to understand what the program's conditions are, what the company's parameters are, and then try to coach them accordingly, saying, hey, based on these conditions, waterfall might work well for you. Or, hey, no, agile might work better for you for your conditions, right? So I'm going to quickly walk you through with an example of understanding when do we choose waterfall and when do we choose agile. And I'm taking the non-IT example here to make it even simpler. So what we're going to try to do is we're going to try to renovate a kitchen, and we see how it works, right? So say we are renovating a kitchen, and let us see when do we adopt waterfall and when do we take the agile path, right? So say, like, for instance, I exactly know which appliances I need in my kitchen, right? Which brand, what dimensions I want, what kind of pattern I'm looking for. And I've already decided the colors of my cabinets, my cooktop, my shelves, the wall, everything, right? I have an idea about everything. I exactly know what I need, and everything is kind of fixed in my head, right? Also, my budget is fixed. So now what happens is the work is very predictable and the outcome is already known because I'm very clear about what I want as an end result, right? Say, for example, I have received an estimate from the renovation company that it takes 3 months for them to complete this. And I'm fine with not using my kitchen for 3 months. So they're telling me they do a full completion, it will take 3 months, they cannot give me the space. So I'm perfectly fine with it, right? So this typically fits very well with the waterfall model because it operates in phases. So when you again come back to the IT side, you would have heard requirements, design, implementation, verification, deployment, maintenance. So these are all different phases. So what happens here is the requirements get logged at the end of requirements phase, while design gets logged at the end of design phase, and so on, right? So changes to them cannot be incorporated after being signed off. So there is a very limited room for innovation and feedback here. So what could happen is there are two sides of it. One, since I already knew my outcome and everything was crystal clear to me, I could be very happy at the end of 3 months because my kitchen was built exactly renovated the way I wanted, right? So that's the happy path. Or there could be another side. So after 3 months, say for instance, I'm not happy with an appliance or a color. I don't like the brand or I don't like the color of the appliance. It is very hard to change, right? There's extra time and budget will be needed for me to keep aside for these changes to be incorporated. When I say time, they're going to again, lock my kitchen for some more time. I'm not going to be able to use it until they go ahead and make the changes, right? So it may leave me a little disappointed. So that is the flip side of it. But the happy path is if I am fully aware of what I want and I'm giving all my requirements very clear upfront, then I'm going to be very happy with this model. So when do we take the agile path? Right? Say I want to renovate my kitchen iteratively. I do not wish to wait for 3 months and I want to start using it as soon as a part of it is built, right? And my MVP is very clear. So you keep hearing this word MVP, right? The minimum viable product. So that's the least I want. So without that, I really cannot proceed further. So I have my priorities. I have my MVP very clear. This is the minimum thing I would need to start functioning. So all that, right? I also want to provide consistent feedback and want to innovate as things are getting built. So I want to see as it gets built and I want to be able to innovate and make changes accordingly. Say, for instance, I want my cooktop and chimney to be ready first so that I can start cooking. So I don't have to keep waiting for the full thing to complete. Then I want my refrigerator so that I can store my vegetables, milk, etc. Right? So next critical item for me is my sink so I can do my dishes, and my slab. And finally, followed by my cabinet and the shelves. So this is my order of priority. So my MVP is kind of very clear. So say while I start cooking, right, I notice that I may need a longer slab. Initially I predicted I only want a medium-sized slab, but now I feel I might need longer because I have more appliances to keep or whatever reason, right? So I can always incorporate it. If I feel I would like a nice wallpaper, which might make my kitchen look more beautiful, I can always ask my designer to add it to the list of items. So through Agile, if you're noticing, we can accommodate new ideas and learnings, which will certainly make me very happy with the end result, right? And one main thing not to forget is that I get to use my kitchen through this process as and when an item is ready. Like when the item number 1 is ready here, my cooktop and chimney, I can start cooking. I don't have to wait for everything to be ready, right? So I really don't have to wait for the full complete, and I get to use it as and when an item is built. So this is a typical scenario when you would go for renovation in an Agile path. Now that we saw about, when do we use Waterfall versus when do we use Agile, let's move on with the frameworks, right? So there's a variety of different approaches or frameworks we call based on the Agile values and principles set out in the Agile Manifesto. I highly recommend for all of you to go and look at Agile Manifesto and to kind of read through all the values and principles that was set as a backbone for us, right? So take time to go and quickly glance through the values and principles set in the Agile Manifesto. So you would have heard many of these frameworks like Scrum, Extreme Programming, Crystal Method, SAFe, etc., right? So again, there is no one size fits all. So we choose these frameworks based on many other factors, exactly like how we picked Waterfall versus Agile, right? We look at the condition, we look at the parameters, we try to say which suits us better. The same is how we are going to do for the frameworks as well, right? So in today's session and through tomorrow's session as well, what we will be focusing on primarily is on Scrum Framework, which is one of the most successful and the widely used framework, right? So just to give you a little bit of background, so Scrum was founded on two things. So it was founded on empiricism and lean thinking. So what empiricism means is we believe that the knowledge comes from experience, right? It's not a bookish knowledge, it's more a knowledge that comes through experience. And we make decisions based on what we observe. So we keep learning and we keep adapting as we keep moving on, right? So that's what empiricism means. And what lean thinking means is we eliminate waste and focus primarily on what is important. So we are not going to be distracted by what is not important. We are going to focus primarily on what is important, and we are trying to eliminate waste throughout. So Scrum is a lightweight framework that helps people, teams, and organizations generate value through adaptive solutions for complex problems. So like I mentioned, it's one of the most successfully and powerfully used framework in the Agile world. So Scrum employs an iterative incremental approach to optimize predictability, and it controls risks. It emphasizes on transparency in communication, like I keep mentioning from the Agile mindset, right? It's one of the most important things. It emphasizes on transparency in communication. So whether it is success or failure, we're transparent about it. And it creates an environment of collectively accountable and accountability and continuous progress. So you'll keep hearing this term called self-managing teams, right? So we are the teams who are self-managing. We are not order takers. We won't necessarily take orders from somebody. We know when to do what and how to do and what to do. So we are a kind of self-managing team. So that's what the environment we're trying to create: collective accountability and continuous progress. It engages a group of people who collectively have all skills and expertise to do the work and share or acquire such skills. So like I mentioned earlier, our team will have multiple different skill sets, people of different skill set coming together to achieve the product goal. So the three pillars of Scrum are transparency, inspection, and adaptation. So like I mentioned, transparency is one of the main things. When I say inspect and adapt, you remember I started off saying it's built on empiricism, where we kind of learn from what we experience when we are trying to adapt through it. So we inspect and adapt throughout the process, right? So the success of the Scrum depends primarily on people becoming more proficient in living the 5 values, which are listed on my slide here. The first one is a commitment. So commitment meaning the commitment to achieve goals and supporting each other. So we are committed to supporting each other as a team, and we are committed towards the goal that we need to achieve. The next one is focus. So when I say focus, it's the focus on the work of the sprint, what we are trying to achieve, right? To make the best possible progress. The next one is openness. Openness about, we're open about our work, we're open about our successes, we're open about our challenges, the failures, we're pretty much open about everything in our team. The next one, and the most important one, is respect. We have mutual respect for each other, and that also includes trust, right? So the previous one, openness, can be easily, come into play when you have mutual respect and trust in your team. The final one is the courage. So it's the courage to do the right thing and to work on tough problems. So that's what courage means. You're having the courage to do the right thing at the right time. If there is something is wrong, you're courageous to call that out. Moving on, it's another interaction segment, and I would like to know, whom do you think are part of the Scrum team? Whom do you think are part of the Scrum Squad? Go ahead and type it in the chat, what you feel Scrum team comprises, or who are all part of the Scrum team. Again, no right or wrong answer. I would like to hear all your thoughts. BA, PM. All right, business analyst, dev team, Scrum Master, product owner, awesome. Product owner, Scrum Master, dev analyst, QA, and PO. All right, QA consultant, business analyst, product owner, automation tester, interesting, developer, app team, deployment team, test team, manager, Scrum Master, everyone who is connected to the product. That's a very interesting response. Every team member in a way. BAPM, Scrum Master. All right, awesome. You kind of got all the skill set in together. So I'm going to walk you through who the Scrum Squad really is. So the first person is our product owner. So the product owner is a person who is primarily responsible for the product backlog and prioritization, right? So the product owner, when I say product owner and the product backlog, so when I say product backlog, what I mean here is it's a list of items where we are trying to, all the vision for the product and all the requirements are translated here, right? So the product backlog contains what we call as user stories. So I'll just take a step back, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about how the product backlog is structured. So most of the cases, most of the organizations, product backlog will have something called as product backlog items, or PBI, which is called in short. So these are typically your epics, features, and user stories. So epics are something at a very high level. Features are something at a little lower level, and user stories are the breakdown of further lower level user stories, right? The stories from the user perspective. So just to give you an example, right? Say, for example, we are implementing Service Cloud for a customer, and they are in the journey to optimize their customer service. So optimizing your customer service becomes your epic, because that is one of the very high level goal. So if I come and tell you I want to optimize customer service, you cannot go and quickly start, delivering items for that and make me realize business value, right? You need to understand more. What does optimizing customer service means to me? So what the product backlog and the product owner does with the product backlog is he or she tries to talk to the customers or the stakeholders and tries to understand what their vision and the product goal is. So if the customer says, I want to optimize my customer service, how I do the customer service. So if I'm the product owner, I start putting that as my epic. So that's the high level thing I have. So I ask more questions, and I'm trying to groom more and understand better what really makes sense for the customer when they say optimizing customer service. So then as I talk, say for instance, the customer tells me, you know what, I want to have an effective case management place where I can go and create cases and manage cases. I have different teams and I want to enable this for them. So what I do is I create a feature for case management, right? So this feature is going to overall achieve the goal of my epic, but this is one of the segment of the epic, right? It's one of the smaller pieces of my epic. So as I go ahead and again talk to my customer about, okay, you tell me that you want to do this case management. So what do you really want to do? What all you want to do, right? So I try to understand, and the customer tells me, hey, I want to create cases. I want my account executives to create cases. I want my customer service agents to create cases. You know what? I really want even the self-service options, right? So we keep brainstorming more and we try to make our product goal better and better, right? So all this I try to add as my product backlog item. So what will happen is as I keep understanding more and more, I arrive at something called a user story, which is at a more granular level, right? So say, for example, while I'm trying to build my case page, right? I'm going to talk in simple business terms. I'm trying to build a case page where a customer can go and create a case. So I start writing user story, right? Saying that as a customer service executive, I want the ability to create a case so that I can manage service to my customer, right? So this could be one of the user story. If I'm adding more fields on the page layout, they can all become individual story. And if I'm going to add a process to it, then I can add more user stories to it. So basically my product backlog is growing bigger and bigger, and it's going to each are going to add business value to the customer. So as we implement all the user stories under one particular case management feature, then my feature is done, right? And like all the features, once they're implemented, my epic is done. So finally, one day, my customer is going to have an optimized customer service solution, right? So I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about product backlog here before I move further, because it's again a term that we'll keep hearing again and again. So this product owner, he or she is going to be responsible for the product backlog, and he or she is also going to be responsible for prioritization of the product backlog. So we talk to the customer to understand which is the topmost priority for you. What is your MVP? What is that you really need and you cannot do without it, right? So it's very important for someone who has not been in Salesforce at all. If it's a fresh implementation, though it may not be a story, it's very important to do the org setup first, right? The customer might not know it. As a product owner, I need to educate the customer that, hey, I know you want to do case management, but before that, let's go and do the org setup. Let's define the roles, let's define the profile, let's do all that stuff, right? So the prioritization and arriving at the MVP is also the responsibility of the product owner. Another main responsibility of product owner is to ensure the entire team understands the product backlog items. So whatever I write, I need to ensure the team understands it fully, because they are the people who are going to build it and deliver business value with me, right? So it's very important that all the questions are answered, and as I keep grooming my stories with the team, more questions will arise and I will get back more clarifications from the business for those items, right? So it's very important that I ensure the team understands the product backlog items. Also, the product owner, through all this process, the main responsibility is also to maximize the value of the product, right? So this is about the product owner. So our next person in the Scrum Squad is a Scrum Master, who is also a true leader. So what does Scrum Master do? Scrum Master serves the Scrum team and the larger organization. He or she again ensures the Scrum is adopted well. If someone is new to Scrum, someone is new to Agile, he or she becomes the coach and mentor through the process. So, everything happens smooth and everybody is happy, right? He or she also facilitates something called as ceremonies, or Scrum ceremonies or Scrum events. It's interchangeably called like that. So your sprint planning, your backlog rolling, your daily stand-up, your sprint review, retrospective, they're all called as Scrum ceremonies or the events. Scrum Master, like the person in the picture here, if you watched Avengers or Avengers fan, Nick Fury, removes impediments for the delivery of the committed product, right? So anytime you have an impediment, the person you may have to reach out to is your Scrum Master. So he or she is going to ensure the impediments are removed. Finally, we have our developers. So when I say developers, I urge you not to think as a configurator or an administrator or someone who codes, right? These are product developers. So every skill set that is necessary for delivering a product successfully is called a developers. So please don't think every time I say developers that this person is a technical coder or a configurator. It could be a testing skill set, it could be an architecture skill set, it could be a integration skill set, or a core coding or a configurator skill set as well. So they're all called developers. So developers deliver potentially shippable increments of done product at the end of each sprint. So basically, whatever you kind of build at the end of the sprint, it should actually match something called as a definition of done, which we will quickly look at in a few minutes. And those are delivered at the end of each sprint. So development team is responsible for that. The developers are self-managing. Like I mentioned earlier, they're not order takers. They choose who, how, and what to work on, right? And the developers are cross-functional team. So in some organizations, you will see multiple function teams or product teams, right? So they're cross-functional. Each of the team has multiple skill sets involved. So now that we have understood what Scrum roles are, let's quickly look at what the Scrum Framework is, how all this comes into play. It all starts with the product owner trying to understand from our executive team, stakeholder, customers or users, or however you want to call the stakeholder team, trying to understand what their vision is. What are they trying to achieve as part of this program? What are their product goals? What is that the product owner needs to build in the product backlog, right? So product owner tries to understand all these inputs from the stakeholders and comes up with something called as the product backlog. So like I mentioned earlier, it's a ranked list of items like what is required, so epics, features, stories, all that comes here. So they're all product backlog items. So what we are trying to do here is, so the product owner first gets the inputs, and he or she comes back and grooms the stories with all of us, the developers, and then tries to get more clarity on the user stories. If there are more questions, there are more clarifications needed. Sometimes with the questions comes new user stories as well, right? We start thinking of different perspectives, different ideas, and more stories even comes into play. So the product backlog is constantly evolving, right? Like our product that keeps constantly evolving. They keep adding more stories. The priorities shift and change as new stories get added. So all this is to achieve a commitment that is called as a product goal. And before I proceed with the Scrum events or other ceremonies, I want to take a step back and talk about what sprints are, because you keep hearing sprint in every event I'm going to talk about. And I'm going to take a step back and tell you what a sprint is, right? So sprints are the heartbeat of Scrum, right? It keeps happening. And ideas are turned into value in each of the sprint. It is a time-boxed iteration of continuous development cycle. So these are usually somewhere between 1 to 4 weeks, right? So end of each sprint, what happens is an increment or multiple increments are created. So when I say increment, it means these are the done product or like your done user stories, if you have to put it even more simple, which are going to be your potentially shippable items. So they all add to the business value to your user. So that's what sprint typically means. So now let's start with our first, Scrum ceremony or the event, right? Which is a sprint planning. So sprint planning is one of the first events, and it initiates the sprint by laying out the work to be performed for the sprint, right? So this plan is created by the collaborative work of the entire Scrum team. So it's not one person, but it's a collaborative work of the entire team. So it essentially addresses 3 questions. So the first one is, why is the sprint valuable? Why do we even do the sprint, right? So what is the sprint goal that we are trying to achieve? So that is one of the primary questions we try to address. The second one is, what can be done this sprint, right? So we have a ton of items in the product backlog. What can be done for this sprint? So what happens is the developers select the items to be included in the current sprint based on some parameters, right? Which we will discuss again in a little bit. The third question, which we try to address, is how will the chosen work get done? So say for now, you know the sprint goal, you know why you're doing the sprint, and you know what are the list of items that you're going to pick for the sprint. Now you try to see, how will I get this done? So what happens is the developers plan the work necessary, like what are the tasks needed. They break each of the user stories into tasks and try to see what is the work necessary to complete this, right? To create the increment that meets the definition of done. So that's what we try to do in sprint planning. The commitment here for us as a team is the sprint goal. We are trying to achieve the sprint goal. Now, assume that your sprint has already started and we have all started doing our work based on our skill sets. And we have something called as a daily stand-up or daily scrum, right? Most of you know that this will happen mostly every single day of your sprint. And the purpose of the daily scrum or daily stand-up is to inspect the progress towards the sprint goal and to produce actionable plan for the next 24 hours, right? So remember, it is something by the development team for the development team. It is not a status meeting. And I really want to emphasize this. And this is one of the major misconceptions I have seen through my experience. A lot of people assume daily stand-ups to be a status meeting, right? And it is not a status meeting because daily Scrum helps promote self-managing team, which is the heart of agility and Scrum, right? So again, like I mentioned, we are not order takers. We are a self-managing team. We are accountable for the work we do. So we determine how to create the done increment, right? We own the Scrum backlog or the sprint backlog, which as a developer team, right? We aim to inspect and adapt the sprint backlog together. So the daily Scrum, what it does is it improves communication, it improves transparency among us, and we try to identify impediments. If there is any challenge that we foresee, we try to call that out during our daily stand-up meeting, and it promotes quick decision making. And one other thing I would like to call out here is do not wait for the daily stand-up or the daily Scrum to call out your impediments. If you see a challenge, don't waste time. Go ahead and, I am your Scrum Master, or call your Scrum Master, or just walk to your Scrum Master, but ensure that your impediment is called out as soon as you know it so that the fix can happen faster. All right, so now say that our daily stand-ups are going pretty well, we are kind of achieving our sprint goal, we are progressing really well. So what do we do next? It's something called as a sprint review. So the purpose of the sprint review is to inspect the outcome of our sprint and determine future adaptation, right? So the Scrum team presents the result of their work to the key stakeholders and the progress towards the product goal. So a lot of people use sprint demo as a word for this, which I am not totally agreeing to, because it's called a review. It's not just demonstrating the stories, right? So it's one of the steps for the sprint review, that as soon as a story gets built, we demonstrate the story to the users and try to get feedback. You demonstrate it to your product owner. So end of the day, your product owner and your customers are happy with it. If there are feedbacks, we try to see if we can incorporate it either in the same sprint or the next sprint based on how big or small the effort is, how complicated and critical the story is, right? So sprint review is typically for gathering feedback and consensus with your product owner and the stakeholder on what work we are done. So after the end of the sprint, by end of the sprint, you have something called as your finished work, right? We have created a product increment. And finally, once we are done with all this, we together as a team try to do retrospective. That's where sprint retrospective meeting comes into play. So the purpose of the sprint retrospective is plan ways to improve the quality and effectiveness. So the Scrum team inspects how the last sprint went with regards to the individuals, how it went well with the tools, how it went well with the process, interactions, definition of done, whatnot, right? So anything that went well, anything that did not go well, and also if you have done something better because something did not go well and you try to solve that problem by some way, or you did not solve that problem at all this is being discussed in the retrospective. So together we create an action plan, right? So we're trying to see what went well, what did not go well, what could have gone better. And then what we try to do is we try to address the improvements as soon as possible. So we don't wait, as soon as possible. If you can do it immediately, great. If not, do it for your next sprint. Try to see how you could have mitigated that situation better. Now, moving on, I just quickly wanted to talk about the definition of done, because that's something I've been talking in a few of my slides earlier as well. So just to set that right, sorry about that. So definition of done is a set of guidelines that dictates everything a team is required to do before they can call their work truly done, right? So our team is done either with a story in a sprint or a feature in a release only if a set of defined criteria is met. So we together agree on the definition of done as a team. So again, another misconception I often see is a lot of people confuse between definition of done and acceptance criteria. So we're going to deal with this in tomorrow's session in detail, but just to give you a quick reference. So acceptance criteria is something which is part of your user story, right? So they are those testable statements which we have as part of your user story to say this user story is complete. So we know that only if this, and this criteria are fulfilled, I can call my user story complete. But what definition of done is, it's across stories, it's across projects, it could be across features, right? So it is a set of guidelines that we put together and we agree upon as a team, saying my sprint is done, my stories in my sprint or features in my release are done only if these conditions are met. For example, your definition of done might include some of these or all of these, saying acceptance criteria is met, the peer review is done based on your development standards. We could have like Apex test pass with no failures. You can say code coverage should be greater than or equal to 85%. Most importantly, stories are tested and passed because you don't want something that's broken to be sent to your production. Integrations are fully tested and passed in case your programs involve integrations. This is one of the good definition of done criteria to be added. All defects are fixed, retested, and closed. User stories demo to the product owner is complete and approved. So like I mentioned, these are some of the examples of guidelines. Your program could have some or all of them, or something out of this list as well, based on how your program works. So now I'm kind of going to walk you through the journey. So there was a lot of theoretical part we spoke so far, right? How the Scrum framework overall works. So this is a real life example that I'm going to show you. I'm going to walk you through the journey of what really happened with one of our customers. Of course, I'm not giving the exact user stories for confidentiality reasons. I have just come up with some dummy stories here, but this is a real scenario that happened. So we started our program, and the product owner came up with something called as a product backlog, right? So we had multiple epics, multiple features, and multiple user stories. So here's a snapshot of some of the user stories we had. So once the stories were started getting built, the product owner was having backlog grooming sessions with the development team, and she was going ahead and explaining all the stories to the development team, saying, hey, this is what the customer wants. This is from the user's perspective, what each story is written, and this is what we are trying to achieve. And the developers had a lot of questions based on different user stories, right? For instance, for the first question, which says, as a sales rep, I want the ability to capture region on my opportunities so that I can view and manage my opportunities by region. So developers had a few questions like, hey, you're saying you want to create this particular field on opportunities. Where should I put this field? Are we integrating with any other system? Are we having any data flows? Should we push or pull data for this? What are the possible values? Who would be updating it? Who would not be updating it? Who should not see it? And whatnot, right? So we kept grooming this particular story. And as the story was getting groomed, certain clarifications was not given immediately because the product owner had to go and check back with the business, which is absolutely fine and great, right? So she went back, checked with the business, and came back with all the clarification. So once each story was, clarified to the fullest, and like I always mention to the development team that ask questions. There is no wrong questions. There is no right questions. Go ahead and ask whatever questions you may have. It's very, very important to understand the user story fully, right? So all the questions were asked and the story was groomed. So at the end of this grooming process, we did something called the user story estimation. Again, I'm going to walk through details of this in tomorrow's session. Please feel free to join tomorrow's session. It's very important with specific user story examples from Salesforce. How do we create, prioritize, estimate stories? But for the benefit of time, I'm just going to tell you that this story was estimated at 3 user story points, right? And it was a consensus that the team came up with, right? So we had all the stories that you see in the screen groomed fully and then estimated as well. So once this process was getting done, and this is an evolving product backlog, right? I've just given 7 stories here, but the product backlog typically had more stories. So the 7 stories, this adds up to 30 story points. So since we have good enough stories to start our sprint, we went ahead with something called a sprint planning, right? This is one of our first event, like I mentioned earlier. So few parameters were taken into consideration along with the list of product backlog item. So I'm going to tell you what velocity and capacity means here. Velocity is something like how my team performed over the last few sprints or releases, right? The average story points we were able to deliver. Again, this is the same team. This is the same set of 5 people working again and again across sprints for the product goal. So the team structure has not changed, the skill set has not changed. It's the same people who have been working. So with that assumption, we had a velocity of 20 user story points in this case. So the team had been consistently or on an average delivering 20 user point stories through the last sprints and releases, right? And for the current sprint, which we are doing the sprint planning, we considered the capacity as well. So by capacity, what I mean is, like I mentioned, we had 5 people working in the development team, right? So we try to understand, is there any planned leaves? Are there any vacation days coming up? Is anybody going out of office? Whatnot, right? And try to see how many hours we have to work as a team, right? So again, a best practice or a guideline that I've seen most of them follow is they take a productive hour for a person to be 6.5 hours in a day. The reason we do not take 8 hours or anything more beyond that is that we spend considerable amount of time in meetings, updating your tools and other activities, right? You could be using Jira or TFS or whatnot for your work, right? So we technically spend more time on story building, but also some time on other meetings or learning for our own selves or updating things in the tool, etc. So with that said, we considered 6.5 hours per day as a productive hours. And we calculated for the 5 people in our team, considering the vacation hours, the any out of office plans and any vacation days. And finally, it was 260 hours was the capacity for the team. So we went to the sprint backlog meeting with these inputs. So velocity and capacity, typically Scrum Master took care of. The product backlog, the product owner took care of. So now the sprint planning meeting started, and the developers, like I mentioned, we are self-managing team, you remember? So we decide which ones to pick and who does what work and how, right? So we looked at the priority of the backlog item. For the ease of viewing, I have sorted this by priority from ascending. So you see it all listed in the order of priority. 1 means it's at most priority for me, for the customer, right? So the first one was picked. So it was 3 user story point. Yeah, well, it fits in my velocity. So let me see how the tasks talk through, right? So the developer team started to break this story into tasks, right? So one thing that you should not do while you're breaking stories into tasks is don't break them like analysis, 1 hour, design, 1 hour, development, 2 hours, testing, half an hour. Don't do that, right? Deployment. So don't ever do it in the waterfallish way. And I'm going to tell you why. Let's take an example here. So the first same user story, I want the ability to capture region on my opportunities so that I can view and manage my opportunities by region as a sales rep, right? So when we break this into tasks, let's see what are the items that are needed to be done to deploy or build this particular user story, right? So it could be like, first, I need a field for region. So creating a field region could be one of my tasks. Second could be updating your pick list values or whatever type of field type you're trying to use. You could have that as a task. And then the location could be another one, right? So you're trying to place this in 2 or 3 page layouts or whatever based on the user story details, right? So that becomes one of your tasks, right? So if there's anything else involved, or if there's any other nuances like FLS, right? Your field level security, who can see what, you can break them into individual tasks So by doing this, you're ensuring that you're covering all the necessary pieces that needs to be done to make this user story complete, right? So it's very important to break down user stories like this into tasks instead of saying analysis, development, design, or testing. So I highly recommend making them into logical tasks. And your task should also be like, validating if the region field is available on so and so page layout, whatever, right, for your sales reps. So because you're trying to even validate if those whatever was built is all correct. So these could be broken down into tasks, and usually tasks are picked again by ourselves. We're not order takers, you remember? So we are going to pick which tasks we are good at. For instance, I might be, as a developer, say I'm like a junior developer, right? I'm not great in coding. I only do basic config stuff. So I try to pick what fits my skill set. And say in case you are really good in integration, you try to pick tasks that are related to that. Or if you're good in a lot of things, so then you go ahead and pick tasks based on your skill set, right? So we pick the tasks and we decide how to go ahead and do it, right? So that's what happens typically for each of these user story. We start breaking them into tasks and say how many hours we need, or hours or minutes or whatever, to complete this particular task. And then we sum it up. So say, for example, for this user story, I need 10 hours, right? So we try to do that for all the user stories. So when we stop and when we say this is my sprint goal is, either if your velocity, you've reached the velocity, right? So 20 story points was your velocity, remember? So now when I pick the first, second, third, and fourth user story, I have reached at 19 user story points. If I'm going to pick the next one, it's going to be 22, which is kind of a red flag because I've only been delivering on an average of a 20 user story point so far. So I should not go ahead and pick the fifth user story, right? So I should stop here. Or if you're going ahead and looking at the task hours, say for example, for the first 5 user stories, it falls like 250 hours and your capacity is 260 hours. So you're good, right? You have enough time to build it. Do not go and pick more if it goes beyond 260 hours, because that is your capacity. So whichever reach you arrive at first, so if either velocity you hit first or your capacity you hit sooner, then stop right there. So do not go and pick more during the sprint planning. Always, if you complete your work during the sprint, you can always come and pick more user stories. Nobody is stopping us, so you will be delivering more than you promised, right? So that's always a happy thing to do. So this is what happened. And so what we did was we, based on our velocity and capacity, we as a team arrived as a sprint goal, the first 4 user stories that you see here. So that's how the sprint goal was arrived as part of our sprint planning. So once sprint planning was done, all of us were back to our work. We started looking at our user stories. We started going ahead and doing our tasks. And once we started doing this, the next day came up, we had a daily stand-up, right? So every day we have a daily stand-up. It typically happens at 9 o'clock in the morning, every single day, and it goes on for 15 minutes. And we all communicate with each other on, how is it going, and if there's any impediments and all that. So one of the developer, Jesse, he came up and told that he has an impediment that he sees with the user story 1156. So he actually started working on this. And this has an integration with Marketo, which is an other system that we used. So the problem he was facing was he was actually working with one of the lead developers with Marketo's team. And he had actually gone out on an emergency leave. So he was suddenly out of office and he was not getting the information that he needed for Jesse to go ahead and build this user story. So what he did was he went ahead. So he knew this on the day one. After our 9 o'clock meeting happened, so around 10 o'clock is when he actually realized this impediment was there. So he missed calling this out during the daily scrum on day one. So only on the next day he came up and he told us all that this impediment is there. If it doesn't get removed, the impediment doesn't get removed, then it's going to affect the delivery of this particular user story. However, the Scrum Master took that information from him. He reached out to Marketo's team, and within the same day, it was kind of fixed. They found another replacement for this developer lead at the Marketo's team, and then the user story was able to proceed again. So after the day stand-ups was going on well, and we were all kind of near reaching our sprint goal, we had our sprint review session. And this is something that we followed a little differently. And again, this was one of the teams where I was coaching as well. So one thing that I always recommend is do not wait necessarily for the sprint review, because it usually happens at the end of the sprint, right? Almost at the near end of the sprint. So what I suggested was, as and when you build a user story, go ahead and demonstrate it, right? There's no harm getting feedback earlier. It's only better for us. It's better for the customer, right? So we followed this. So one or two logically grouped user stories, if it was built, then we went ahead and demonstrated to the user. Like for this, in this case, we demonstrated the first and the second user story together, because both involved opportunity regions in play. So one was capturing it and one was reporting on it. So we were able to do that. And sometimes what happens is the stakeholders are not always available for these short meetings. So then we demonstrate it to the product owner, try to get feedback, and then finally during the sprint review meeting, we again demonstrate all to the stakeholders and get their feedback. So a couple of things happened during the sprint review in our journey. So there were some feedbacks that came into play, right? So with the third user story that you see here, again with Marketo, there was a feedback that the customer gave that, it will be nice to add a field in Salesforce to say that this lead came from Marketo, because that was not there. We were just getting new leads from Marketo into Salesforce, but they want the ability to know whenever they're looking at the leads that, hey, this lead came from Marketo. This was not generated in Salesforce, right? So they wanted an ability to do that. And there was another feedback that came on the user story one, that the initial location they thought they wanted region field in, they don't want it there. They wanted to move it to a different section on the page layout, right? So these are the two feedbacks that came. And what we did were, they were asking if we could implement both of these changes in the same sprint. So what we did was, for the first user story, because it was just a kind of dragging and dropping the field into a different section, it was not much risky to take it at the near end of the sprint, right? We had 2 more days available for our sprint to be over. So what we did was, we said, yeah, I think we could do that, because we didn't have to do any reanalysis or redesign for it. It was just the location being changed, but everything else was fine, right? And for the Marketo feedback, where they wanted a field, so there was a bit of analysis needed here, though the feedback comes very simple, right? They're just saying they want a field to say that, this is coming from Marketo. Since this involves integration and there's a fair bit of complexity and risk involved, it is not advisable to take it at the near end of the sprint. You never know whether you will be able to deliver it or not. And end of the day, we don't want to break something that we've already built. So what we did was, we told the customer, the stakeholders that, hey, we'll just add this to our product backlog. Let us groom it. Let's just analyze this a bit more. And, we can reprioritize our backlog, and we will see if this is so much critical for you that you need it quickly. We can, make the priority higher, and we can see if we can deliver it in the next sprint or whatsoever, right? So that's how. So it's okay to say no, and don't think that your customer will be happy if you're going to accept all the changes in Agile immediately. That's not the expectation of being in an Agile journey. No to say, you're not saying technically no to the customer. You're saying you will take it, but you're going to take it later, because the customers are not aware of your system limitations, or what could break and what not, right? They only are aware of the business part of it, right? So it's very important, as Salesforce consultant, as a Salesforce Scrum team, we ensure that we educate them if such scenarios arises. End of the day, you cannot make customer happy just by saying yes in the last minute, but only if you make the customer successful by giving high value user stories to the customer. Only then they are actually going to be happy in the long run, right? So it's very important to realize when to say, yes, I will take it, or say, hey, I will take it, but not probably in the same sprint, probably for the next sprint, right? So this is what happened in our sprint review. And finally, once our sprint was done, not much of a shockers in production. It was all smooth delivery. Customer was happy. And what we did as a team, again, was we grouped back together and we did something called as a sprint retrospective. Like I mentioned, it was the last event we talked about. So we were talking about what went well, what did not go well, and all that. And we felt, we had a good pace. We were not overworked or something. So that was perfectly well, going well. So we were very happy about it. We got enough help from each other, and we were able to deliver the product goal without much stress. So all that were the happy things that we talked about. And something that did not go well, which came up, was this last minute thing that happened with the Marketo lead developer, right? So he had an emergency, so he had to be out. And one thing we discussed as what could have gone better on this problem was, so what Jesse did is he waited. So 9 o'clock, this daily stand-up happened, right? 10 o'clock, he knew that he has this impediment, but he waited for the next day morning to call this out to the Scrum Master. So we were thinking that, hey, we need to little bit tweak our process, right? Let's not wait for the daily stand-up to call out impediments. We could have just gone directly to the Scrum Master, just IM'd him, or call them and let us know that, let them know that this impediment was there. It could have got solved the same day. So you would have got more time to make progress on that particular story, right? So that was given as one of the improvement areas, and it was immediately acted upon as an action item by the Scrum Master, saying, hey, moving on, this is the process we will follow. These events and all the roles which the framework has given us is to give us a structure, right? So give us a path that you will be successful if you follow these as a suggestion or the best practice. This roles and this particular, the ceremonies can make the team successful if you're taking the agile path. But that doesn't mean you cannot do something additional based on your condition parameters to be successful, right? So it's just framework. So use it to how it will benefit you, not just because it shouldn't be like a theory book where you say, hey, Scrum has only told this, I should only talk about this in the daily stand-up. No, that's not what Scrum has told us, right? It's a mindset. We are talking about the mind shift change, right? So we kind of tweak and add improvement areas. So we inspect and adapt through our journey. So it's very important to do that. Now, we are almost at the near end of session, and I wanted to finish this session with a very interesting story when Salesforce met Agile. I don't know how many of you know when Salesforce as a company actually met Agile, but I am more than happy to walk you through that success story as well. So imagine us heading to a Dreamforce, right? And there are no keynotes, no new product announcement, no innovation features available for the next year. How sad would that be, right? We are at Dreamforce and none of this is happening. This almost happened to Salesforce in 2006, but they dodged that scenario by implementing a new workflow that changed the way they developed and delivered products. So by 2006, Salesforce had experienced phenomenal growth. There were more customers, more products, more revenue, and they were a much bigger company compared to 1999 when they actually started, right? So and any growth doesn't come pain-free. So things were not easier anymore. And there was a slowdown in innovation, and then the scaling communication, collaboration, and management, all while trying to meet the release dates became challenging for Salesforce. That is when they took the risk and reinvented a way of delivering solution by adopting agile principles, values, and practices. So most of the work Salesforce does is innovation based, as many of us know, right? And the final outcome is always not known upfront. And agile works like a charm for most of these teams. While, like I mentioned earlier, some programs can still work better in Waterfall, right? Salesforce knew that. So some of their teams are still on Waterfall where their outcomes are clearly known up front. They're all predictable. They're still on Waterfall. They didn't move everything on Agile. Only the programs which needed to be moved were moved. So when they adopted Agile, so 150 people were organized into small cross-functional teams working in short iterations. It's phenomenal to see how much they had grown over these years and how Agile is working like a charm in many of these programs. And kudos to Salesforce for taking that risk and dodging that scenario with a very powerful way of mitigating the risk. And it's so great to witness all the growth we are seeing in Salesforce, and we're all getting benefited out of it. Now, I'm going to open this up for Q&A. Like I mentioned, I'm going to add more articles on Agile and Salesforce. in our blogs at salesforcecouple.com. So if anyone would like to read more or hear more tips and tricks, feel free to go there and subscribe to us. And we would be giving more good articles around Agile and Salesforce in the coming days. All right, so do we have any questions from anyone?
So there is one question. What is the difference between epic and feature?
All right. So epic is a very, very high level requirement. Like I mentioned, if they're doing a service cloud implementation and they're trying to say one of the main vision for us is to optimize our customer service. How do we service our customers? So that's at a very, very, very high level, right? So that becomes your epic. And feature is a little lower level stuff. So to achieve that optimization of your customer service, you need to do a lot of things, right? One could be case management, where you're trying to build a solution for how we create and manage cases. And one could be like, how do we improve our self-service, right? Can we have frequently asked questions documented somewhere? Can we use knowledge articles in Salesforce terms? So all that could be a different feature, right? And then each feature, as we groom, we talk about more, we come up with more user stories, which are something we can tangibly build and deliver the value sooner, right? So when I say case management or creating cases, so adding your fields to your page layout, what all fields we need to create cases, who can create cases, how does the entire process work? So each of these steps to this becomes your user stories. So they are your granular requirements, which you are going to deliver through sprints. And we're going to talk through this in detail tomorrow about user stories, but these are simpler, concise requirements which can be delivered sooner and faster, right? And so that the business value is realized quickly. So it shouldn't be very big that we sit on it for a few weeks and they're able to use it only then. For instance, if you just create a page layout for the user to create a case, right? They can start using it. They can start using that layout to create cases. You don't necessarily have to build the entire process for them to do that. So I hope that answered your question.
Sagar, look like you have a question. You can unmute yourself and ask a question. And anybody need to ask
Thank
a
you,
question,
Amit.
raise your hand. I will be ask you into sequence.
Yeah, thank you, Amit. So yeah, my question is, how do you plan work for the first sprint when you don't have visibility on the sprint velocities? Do you just take into consideration the capacity, or is there anything else according to you?
That's a wonderful question. I'm glad you asked that. So always we start at some point in our agile journey, right? We do not know the velocity, right? So some people, what they do is they start with the capacity, because that is something you can always predict. And again, that becomes your velocity for the next sprint. Because with a new team, when we start, we do not know the velocity at all, unless you have done the similar type of projects for a different program with the same team, which is having the same conditions as yours. But otherwise, it's okay to start with capacity, and the next sprint you will know your velocity, right? Because you cannot really average it because that's the only sprint you've done. But as you keep progressing, you will be able to come up with a more accurate velocities.
Exactly. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
Rohit, you can go now.
Yeah, thank you, Amit. So I have a question, Sudha. Like, it's a practical question that we are actually facing right now. And the question is like how we can ensure that the deliveries that we're doing in each sprint, it is aligned with the product owner. And can there be a tangible sign off between the sprints that we are delivering? Or should this tangible sign off be already at the end of all of the sprints? So it should go, because right now we are facing a situation, right? Because product owner is pretty busy because he or she cannot look at all the sub projects, right? And then in the end, when all the sprints are delivered, then we are getting the new requirements. So can there be a tangible sign off after each sprint, and how we can do that?
Right. So there are a few parts to this question, right? So one is we try to align to the product goal, not to the product owner, right? So the product owner is a person who is there today. He or she can change later also. So the product goal is one common thing that we all work towards. And if your product owner does not have time to give you clarifications, it's actually not a good sign, right? You need to raise it with your Scrum Master and let him or her know that you need product owner to keep continuing with your work because you have questions on your user stories, and you need to understand the user story better to come up with the right solution. So the Scrum Master should be able to help you. So in case your product owner is overworked, he or she is engaged in multiple programs, then they need to have another product owner who can come and share her or his workload and give you enough attention, because it's very important to get all of their attention to become successful in Scrum project, right? Because you need to have your product owner to product owners are generally constantly available for the developer team. If they are not available during a particular time zone because you're a distributed team, they should be able to help you answering your questions either in Jira or any other tools that you use, or by emails, whatever mechanism that you have today. But there is a red flag if your product owner does not have time for clarifications. So I think you should definitely take that with your Scrum Master and let the Scrum Master know this is not going well, and maybe they'll have to add a product owner. And usually another successful thing that I have seen is they have different product teams that they call, or function teams, right? So you have the same team cannot work on multiple things. So usually a product owner is spread across few product teams. So that is something that it might happen that he or she is not able to have time for all. But like I mentioned, it's a red flag. So maybe you can schedule a proper time with the product owner to ensure your clarifications are done. Please ensure you tell it to your Scrum Master that, hey, if this doesn't happen, then the product goal is not going to be achieved. We cannot deliver this without the help of the product owner, because you'll be wasting your time and effort of building something that is not correct. At the end of the day, your customer might want something else, but you're building something else because you don't have enough information about it. So please raise it up with your Scrum Master.
Yeah. So is it like, shall we have a tangible sign off over the email or over maybe a document, something that, hey, we met these requirements and we have reviewed this with the product owner. These are the feedbacks, and we will take care of these feedbacks maybe as a user story in the next sprints. So how should we do that actually as a tangible proof? Right?
Yeah, so for sprint, the sprint review is mainly for that, right? So the sprint review sessions are usually recorded. Most of them record their sprint review session. So you demonstrate the user stories. The feedback is obtained there. And I have seen some of them, like if you're using again a tool, which is, I keep iterating it because it's the best way to store all informations in one place. So what the Scrum Master and the product owner, they can do is once a story is demoed and there's a sign off, you can go and mark that story as complete, because it has met the definition of done. It has been demonstrated. If everything is done, right? If your definition of done for the particular user story is fulfilled, then you can mark the user story as complete. So that way you know that the story is fully done. Also, something else I've seen a lot of companies do is the product owner sends an email after the sprint review meeting, like the meeting minutes type, where he or she tells that, hey, we demonstrated so-and-so stories. These stories were approved on the call. These are the feedbacks we received. And, we would have another meeting to groom the stories. Like I mentioned in my journey use case, one of the stories we could accommodate immediately, but that's not demonstrated, right? So that's one of the action items. I need to move the location, the region field to a different section. So that was not built, but I'm going to incorporate in the same sprint, right? So we need to have some action plan for that. And also for the story, which will not be part of this particular sprint, which needs to be groomed, you just add your note saying that the story will be groomed and prioritized for future releases. So that's another way of ensuring that your sign off, your approval is recorded.
Got that. Thanks, Sudha.
One last question from Sheetal. Sheetal, you can unmute yourself. I know we have lots of other questions, but we will take care of all this question in tomorrow's session. But just because of we are running out of time, so we'll take only one question. So Sheetal or Bob, anyone can unmute yourself and ask a question.
Hi, I have a question if no one else does. It's actually also in the chat. Ankit had the same question. Product owner is always from the client or customer side, or where can you place that role?
Yeah, so mostly, I mean, it depends again based on the company, right? Some organizations have product owner who are from their side, meaning their own stakeholder side. And sometimes they have servicing companies and they ask them to come up with a product owner along with other team members, right? So it happens based on the programs. So end of the day, I would say we're all one team. So it is very important not to think like, hey, they are customers and we are the IT team. Please, that mindset should never be there. We're all working towards the common goal to make the customer successful. So our mind should always think like we're all like one team, which includes the customer, because that's the vision we are trying to achieve together, right? But from a, if you ask from a role perspective, I have seen it work on both ways. We have our organizations where they have product owners because they're already subject matter experts and they have been in the organization for so long. So it's easy for them to understand the vision and come up with the product backlog items. While I've also seen where they don't have enough knowledge within the team and they ask the servicing company or the IT team to come up with a product owner, scrum master, and the team, everything, right? Because they don't know how to go about it at all. So I've seen both happen. I hope that answers your question, Barb.
Okay, so pretty much we cover most of the question, and we are sorry which all question we are not able to cover because we are already running out of the time. And thank you so much, Sudha, for such a great session. And it's a request from everyone. Don't forget to miss our tomorrow session. I already gave the link into the chat window, or you can go to the Apex Hour website to get the session detail. And you just need to RSVP for tomorrow. I hope tomorrow's session will be more interactive and you will be get more detail about it. And thank you everyone for the joining, and thank you so much, Sudha, for such a great session. And thank you everyone.
Thank you, Amit, and thank you, Apex Hours, for